Good day for her today. All right, I want to begin by sharing a story that it was told as a true story. A lady got to the point in her young adult life when her grandmother died, and one of the elderly family members came to her and said, we started going through all of Grandma's stuff, and we found this old box. And I just kind of barely looked at it, and I could tell that it was a box of dishes, and from just the little glimmer that I had, didn't even open the box all the way, they were blue, and I know that, that blue is your favorite color. And so we're going to give you this box of Grandma's old dishes. And so she thought, well, that's nice, and she got them, and she took them home, opened the box, and began to unpack the box, and discovered, much to her surprise, this was the most exquisite china. They were all individually painted, and they were inlaid individually with mother of pearl. They were rimmed with gold leaf, and the whole set had been handcrafted from Bavaria. And she thought, man, this is really something. This isn't just an old set of dishes. And so she went and inquired of a couple of her older living relatives that might have known Grandma way back. And sure enough, she was told that after Grandma got married, some of the older family members decided that she ought to have this set of china, and they began giving it to her little by little. And they were able to get a hold of this china, several pieces a year, and so she began collecting it, and as she got it. They were so nice and so special that by the time she got a pretty good set beginning to accumulate, she decided that they needed to be saved for a special occasion. This was just too good to just use on a daily basis. And so she lived the rest of her life, died, with those dishes still in the box. There was no occasion that special that ever came along. So she went to her grave with the greatest gift of her life, unopened and unused. Someone has said, there's no tragedy like the tragedy of the unopened gift. Just think about that. I know in my own life, when I must have been 7 or 8 years old. For Christmas one year, I had requested a Johnny Eagle Red River gun set. It included a rifle and a pistol, and they had like a nice display board that you could hang it on your wall, and it looked like horns came out, and they hung on the horns, and it was just cool, and I really wanted it. And I imagined myself playing with the neighbors, and back in those days we didn't care so much about gun toys and stuff, but I thought about shooting my neighbor kids, and they had these little spring-loaded plastic bullets. I mean, this was a cool set. My mother, on the other hand, she had seen the ad in the catalog, and we got it or whatever. She decided that this was something that you display on your bedroom wall. And the thing had this thing, like there were like screws in the back where you could screw it in so that they didn't fall off or whatever. But it also meant that as a child I couldn't take them off. And so there was my favorite toys that I wanted, hung on my bedroom wall, and I couldn't play with it. Man, did that make me mad. And it was several years before they let me take it off the wall and play with it a little bit. Kind of the equivalent of an unopened gift. But really, when you get a really nice gift, there's two approaches. One is you think the gift is so valuable, it shouldn't be risked. This is so valuable, you've got to take care of it and store it and wrap it and only take it out for special occasions, and hopefully you'll get one of those special occasions that comes along. The other is that the gift is so valuable, it's got to be risked. This just has to be used. You don't just put this away and store it, so you have to do that thing. And so our question this morning that we want to look at is the question of, is your life following the first or the second way? Or to put it another way, are you a boat potato or a water walker? We have all become familiar in our culture with the term couch potato. And we all understand that to mean someone who just wants to spend their time sitting on their couch and vegging out and all those kinds of things. And we've been talking about the idea of a water walker, or someone who walks on water. And we have been working for the last 2 weeks from the book. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat by John Ortberg. And we're going to continue that today. Although today we're going to go to a different scripture that kind of illustrates what we're talking about. But we want to begin by reading the main story itself one more time. So Matthew chapter 14. Beginning with the 22nd verse. Context, Jesus had just finished feeding the 5,000, if you're familiar with that story. And when that's over, we pick up this story. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "let me come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord. When Peter saw Jesus on the water, he chose the second way. Instead of saying this is something that ought to be treasured and put away and stored, and he wanted to get out of the boat and walk on the water. He didn't want to be a couch potato. He wanted to be a water walker. Which brings us to another story, and it's kind of a call to would-be boat potatoes. So the people who are thinking, I'd rather sit in the boat and be safe, I'd rather be on the couch than get out and do stuff. This is kind of a challenge to everyone in that category. And I think that while most of us want to think we want to be water walkers, oftentimes when real life occasions crop up, we find ourselves kind of moving back to being boat potatoes. And so we're going to read this other passage. Also in Matthew, just a few chapters over, chapter 25. Chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. This time Jesus is telling parables. "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once, put his money to work, and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. 'Master, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.' The man with 2 bags of gold came and said, 'Master, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came and said, "Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the banker so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has little will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant out into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." This story kind of illustrates for us the point of comparison is that using those talents is kind of like getting out of the boat. It means taking a chance, taking a risk, and being active and doing something. Whereas burying the gold in the sand or in the ground is like being a boat potato. It's where you say, "I'm not going to get out of the boat. I'm going to sit here and be comfortable and whatever." But I want to begin by just kind of reminding you of the impact of this message. And we really can't get it because, we're familiar with the word talent, meaning like, the skills that you have. I can sing, I have that talent, But that was a measurement of money back then. And that measurement of money was, a talent was like 20 years' wages. So if you take minimum wage and multiply it by 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, that comes out to about $300,000, a little more than that. And so the person who was given a talent, that guy was given $300,000 and told to do something with it. And the person who had 2 bags, $600,000. And the person with 5 bags, we're talking $1.5 million, give or take. So that's the kind of money we're talking about in this story. Jesus was using what they would have considered massive amounts of money. That's $1 million, like back then. An unbelievable opportunity. The ability to have that kind of money at your disposal and be told to do something with it was unbelievable. And one of the key words that comes up in this story is that it says "at once." Like their response was not slow and drawn out, and they didn't go and have committee meetings and planning meetings, and we're gonna think and pray about it for 60 days. And, they got on the job. They immediately began to do things, and I think that's one of the things that we often forget when we're serving the Lord is we like to hesitate. I read a book by a man who was kind of the Roman Catholic equivalent of William Booth, who founded the Salvation Army. He was responsible for things like St. Vincent de Paul, and their stores and all that. And they asked this man near the end of his life, "How did you manage to accomplish all of these things that you accomplished?" And his answer was, I can't quote it word for word, but it was, I could do the key word. The answer was to do unhesitatingly everything that God told me to do. Unhesitatingly. So if he thought God was telling me to do something, he did it. He didn't wait. He didn't hang around and second guess things. He just got right into it at once. So the third servant, the one who took the gift and buried it in the ground, took the greatest gift he will ever be given and buried it in the ground. You can see how he's like the lady with the dishes. You get these, these are so nice. Got to put them in a box and wrap them and store them until the right thing comes up, and then the right thing came up. So this great gift that she had been given for years, that she had loved and wanted, never used it one time. This guy who's given, here's a chance. Here's $300,000 for you to invest and do something with, and it takes money to make money, and What's he do with it? He went and buried it in the ground and hid it away so it would stay safe, quote unquote. But what he did was he ignored that there would be a day of reckoning. Someday, that master's going to come back, who he knew expected to make money, would come and want to know, what did you do with the money? How did it go? How much did you make? There will be a day of reckoning. So here's the reminder for us today. Your literal talents, that is your ability to sing, your ability to be hospitable, your ability to teach, your literal talents, all of your stuff, your house, your cars, your hobby collectibles, and all of Robin's Coke stuff, the opportunities that you have, your skills, your mind, your ability to think, your very life, all gifts from God. Think about that. Let that sink in. All of that stuff, all gifts from God. See where we're going? There will be a day of reckoning. There will come a day when God will ask the question in one form or another, what did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with your mind? What did you do with the stuff that you collected? What did you do with the opportunities that you have? What did you do with the skill sets that I gave you? The assets that you have? What did you do with what I gave you? So here's the lesson that we need to learn. The third servant was condemned not for being bad, but for doing nothing. It doesn't say that he took the money and went out and bought drugs with it or took out a hit on somebody. He wasn't being bad with the money. He did nothing, and that's why he was condemned. In other words, he was a boat potato. He took the gifts that he had and just sat there. Did absolutely nothing. And so if we kind of boil that down into a simple lesson, apparently, unrealized potential is a sin. You ever think about that? Unrealized potential. Having gifts and abilities and skills and opportunities and all those, and doing nothing with them for the Lord, it's a sin. It's expected that when he gives you stuff, that you're going to do stuff with it. So what is it that keeps these boat potatoes? Why would they take a gift like that and bury it? Why do nothing? One author suggests there are three main reasons. And the first reason is that we like to make comparisons. Well, my gift is smaller. I only got one talent. He got 5. That's not fair. You see the person saying, I wish I could get up front and sing beautiful specials, and everybody would think what a great voice I have, but I can't carry 2 in the bucket. Why do Caleb and Elias get to have good voices and I don't? That's not fair. That's cheating. You call God a cheater. Think about it. But when you begin to do these comparisons, well, my gift is smaller. I don't have the one I want. And so I'm not going to do anything. It's like, yeah, I'm great at hospitality, but because I can't be an upfront on the platform singer, I'm not going to use my talent. And so the idea of comparing our gifts with other people's gifts leads to a dead end. It's not about whether you get 1, 2, or 5 talents. It's about doing with what you were given. You're responsible for what you were given, not responsible for what he was given. Another one, of course, is fear. He was afraid of what his master would do if he lost the money, and so he had that fear. I read somewhere that the number one command in the Bible, based on the number of times it shows up, is a variation of the words, do not fear. It seems like time after time after time after time, when God approaches someone with a message, or when he comes to answer a prayer, one of the first things that he has to say is, do not be afraid. Because that was the response that almost every time came up. They saw Jesus walking toward them on the water. Do not be afraid, it is I. The angels appear to Mary and Joseph. The first thing he tells them is, don't be afraid. And you can just go through the Bible and over and over and over again. Joshua, back in the Old Testament, take courage. So trying to, this fear, we need to, and we talked about this a little bit, I think last week or the week before, we need to get comfortable with being afraid. Don't expect to come to the point in your life where there's nothing that's going to make you afraid again. What you need to learn is that you need to accept fear and overcome it. I'm going to do this even though it scares me to do this. Another kid story, my neighbors had a barn that was dilapidated and no longer used like a barn. It was mostly a giant storage building. But we kids would play in it. And by play in it, I mean, we would run around and swing on the big rope and climb up into the hayloft and do this, that, and the other. But my first exposures when I was very young, probably 7-ish, I was afraid to climb up the makeshift ladder into the hayloft. And so my neighbor kids, being these geniuses, said, well, we got an idea. Tomorrow, come over and climb to the second rung. And then you come over the next day and climb to the third rung. And after about a week, you'll be up in the hayloft. And I remember literally being so scared and making myself, one rung at a time, climb that ladder. And after getting about halfway up, it's like, well, this seems safer than I thought it was, and I seem okay. And at the end of about a week, I made it into the hayloft, and we had fun up there. And within, my mom would have been terrified. Within a few days, like the other kids, I was climbing where there weren't a loft or weren't climbing up on the beams and walking across the rafters. And we were just all over the barn. We would play, we'd get these, remember like Ivory Liquid soap bottles? We would pretend they were bombs. And we'd carry them around and throw them at each other and then try to, run across the beam to get away. And it was crazy. But that particular fear went away. And then a few years later, I was a teenager, and we were working on shingling a roof. And for whatever reason, I can't explain it because heights didn't seem to bother me, but I got to the top of the ladder and was about to make that step from the ladder onto the roof, and suddenly I realized I was scared to death to do that. It just seemed so unstable and so unsafe. Because what happens if the ladder slips? Because when I push off to move over here, the ladder's going to have a tendency to go that way, and then I could fall. And I said, I was scared. But I made myself do it because, my dad and my uncle were on the roof, and I'm not going to let them know that I'm scared. I'm a strong teen boy. And so I made myself. And then, you end up going through life and you realize that I got over that fear, and then I got this new fear to face. And I got over that, and then something new came up. And it's all different. But God tells us to get over that fear, not let it hold us back. The next one is slothfulness. We often think that means lazy, which it does. That's a part of being slothful, is being lazy. But slothfulness can also be motivated by things other than laziness. And two of them are that attitude of, well, I would, but this situation makes it hard for me to do that. I would go do this, but I've got to babysit for so-and-so, or, I would do this, but I don't have the right equipment. And so we use the I would, but excuse to not do things that we ought to do. Well, I would teach that class, but I don't have the skill, whatever. And then the I will win. Oh, I'll do that, like I've been asked to pick so-and-so up, but my car's not very good. I'll do that when I get a new car. I'll do that when I graduate. And I remember starting seminary, and my memory, a long-term memory is better than my short-term memory nowadays. I remember one of the professors standing up, the business manager, getting up front and saying, many of you, you've all been called to ministry, you wouldn't be here. And many of you are going to have this attitude that you're going to start when you graduate. But I'm telling you right now, while you're here going to school, you need to get involved in a local church and you need to begin ministry. You need to start now. And when people start calling me in 3 or 4 years and wanting a reference, as district superintendents are looking for people to come and pastor their churches, they're going to say, what did he do? And I'm going to say, well, to my knowledge, nothing. Or I'm going to say, well, he went to such and such a local church and taught Sunday school and helped out with the youth group and did this, that, they're going to be looking for people who are ministering now, not when you graduate. Don't don't play this, I will minister when I'm done with my school. You got to start now while going to school. And so that's an important lesson, I think, for all of us. We can't live by the I will win. So I want to take a quick look at some of the water walking results. Those who didn't say, I will later, I won't, those who don't say I'm afraid to, it's not fair. I want to see if you recognize these stories from the Bible. The story of the stuttering fugitive who took on a world power dictator and his army. Who was that? Moses. Remember Moses, the Lord says, I want you to go tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses said, I stutter. I'm not the right guy. And God said, well, we'll take care of that. You go anyway. Take care. And the result of that, of course, was that God's people left Egypt successfully and ended up eventually in the Promised Land. Then there was the boy who took down a giant, David and Goliath. You've got this Goliath, intimidating the entire army of Israel. Who wants to come out against me? And nobody, all of the trained soldiers of Israel, including the Israeli equivalent at the time of the special forces, they had like the 30 mighty men during that, they wouldn't do it. David, the shepherd boy, shows up. Well, I'll do it. I've got the Lord on my side. And so David conquers the giant. There was the boy with 5 fish and 2 small loaves that fed a crowd of 5,000 people plus the men and women. I referenced that story earlier. Think about it. You're in a crowd, there's this big thing going on, and you're standing nearby, and the leaders are kind of making a little huddle over here, and they say, what are we going to do? How are we going to feed these people? And you're thinking, well, I've got, these 5 fish and 2 small loaves. What good's that going to do? Look at all these people. But instead, I've got 5 fish and 2 small loaves. Maybe that'll help. And so they ended up taking that, and Jesus multiplied it and fed everybody with it. 2 mites launched a stewardship campaign. You know what a mite is? It's another one of those biblical coins worth about half a cent. And there's the story where a widow lady had 2 mites to her name. And she came to the point where she was supposed to give an offering, and she said, I'll give these 2 mites. And there were some people who were kind of like, what do we care about that? 2 mites, what good's that going to do? And Jesus said, she gave more than these Pharisees did, because they gave a little bit out of their wealth. And she gave everything she had. And so that kind of launched this stewardship campaign. It teaches us how to be good stewards. These are all people who were faced with the choice of staying in the boat or walking on water, figuratively, of course. And they chose to walk on water and accomplish these things. And the Bible's full of such stories. And Christianity has been full of such stories ever since. So our question is, what dreams has God given you? If you have a dream that God has given you that you've not acted on, you're like the guy who buried your talents in the dirt, or the guy who stayed in the boat. What gifts has God given you? I'm a firm believer that God has gifted everyone. There are some gifts that are more noticeable, that are more admired by fellow citizens. But God has given everyone a gift of one kind or another. And they can use those gifts. And they might even change over the years. Those of you who remember our dear, sweet member, Frances Murfeld, there was a time when she was much more involved in church and beautiful voice. They said that she could sing like an angel. By the time most of us knew her, she couldn't sing anymore. And then she would come and testify that, I flew down to New Orleans to Mississippi to visit my family. And as I got ready to get on the plane, I prayed, Lord, please let someone who needs to know you sit next to me so that I can talk to them. She had a new gift. That ability to talk to strangers and lead them to the Lord. What gift do you have? See, God doesn't want you to use the gifts that you don't have. If you don't have, the gift of this, then don't sign up for that. But if you have the gift, you better be using it. What burdens has God given you? Do you see someone in need and you just really need to help? And do you see a problem? I remember a time in my life, I was probably not quite 30, and I was at Kmart. And as I'm in Kmart, a store clerk came around. There was a guy looking at a cooler. And he said to him, the guy holding the cooler said to her, will this cooler work for hot and cold? And she flippantly said, oh, it should be on the side of the box, just read about it. And he kind of put his head down and quietly said, oh, I don't read myself. And I began to think about being an adult in America and not being able to read. And it really burdened me. And, I failed to do anything immediately. I didn't know what to do. But then one day I heard that there was an organization called the Literacy Council that taught adults who can't read how to read. And so I joined, and for several years did that as a one-on-one tutor to adults who couldn't read. And it turned out that a lot of my clients ended up being people who could read, but not in English. And so I would work with people who couldn't speak Spanish, who couldn't speak English, and I helped teach them to read English. But it was a burden that God gave me. And I never would have thought it, I have a special place in my heart for people, adults who can't read. But the day I heard that man in the store say, I can't read myself, it gave me a burden. What burden has God given you? And then, of course, what opportunities has God given you? I believe that night when Jesus was walking on the water, all 12 disciples had the opportunity to get out of that boat and walk to Jesus. But only one took the opportunity. The rest of them let fear and, maybe slothfulness, whatever it was, hold them back. So what happens if you get out of the boat? Surprise? What you hear is this: you have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. When you act on the little things God puts in front of you, those first opportunities, if you succeed, then you'll get bigger opportunities. And you'll be getting them. Some people say, I don't want a bigger job. But you should. So our moral of the day, our main lesson, our main challenge, is don't be a boat potato when you can be a water walker. It's just not worth it. Let's pray.